Good afternoon. I'm Darrell Gunter, Director of SDM North America. Welcome back to our great program. Before we get started with our next speaker, I just wanted to take a moment to thank our sponsors. We want to thank Adipon for the great lunch that we just had. And of course, I want to mention Aries because they have sponsored the Wi-Fi at all of our events in 2015. So we really want to thank the Aries team. And our chorus colleagues, we want to thank them for their sponsorship. And also, we want to thank OCLC for their sponsorship as well. It's because of your generosity, it helps to defray our costs and help our association, so we thank you. Now, let's move on to monitoring the transition to open access in the UK. And I'm so pleased to have Mr. Michael Jubb here to present. Michael?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to talk about this. I think this is the third time I've spoken to an STM meeting, and I'm always very conscious that I have never worked for a publisher. I've never worked for a service provider for publishers. I've never even worked in a library. But I work as a sort of outside observer of the scholarly publishing and more generally scholarly communications scene. And I've done that quite late in my career in one sense. And one of the things that struck me when I first started working in this territory was that there was a paucity of publicly available information about some pretty general aspects and dimensions of scholarly publishing and of the scholarly communications scene generally. I think that's begun to improve in recent years, and STM, particularly through Mark Ware's work with you, has done quite a lot to move things along in that territory. But even there, I think it's important to note that the work is not done, as was the theme of the session before lunch, in collaboration with the other key players in the scholarly scientific communications landscape, with universities, with funders, with libraries, and so on. And that is an omission that the Finch Group, which I'll talk about in a minute, recommended should be addressed, particularly in the form of gathering some information on a collaborative basis about the transition to open access, obviously with particular reference to the UK. So that's what I'm going to talk about in this session. And let me emphasize that the brief that we were given was to present information, to present as good data and indicators as we could generate, not to make policy recommendations on the back of that. And so in some senses I'm going to disappoint you because I'm not going to say what should happen henceforth. So let me just sketch in the context. The Finch report back in 2012 and 2013, particularly the second report, which looked at what had happened since the first report was published in June 2012. One of the things that it said was that some kind of enterprise should be established to bring together all the key players in the scholarly communications business, enterprise in the UK, to keep the kind of conversation going that had characterised the Finch group itself. And Universities UK, which is, if you like, the trade body which all universities in the UK belong to, was asked to set up an open access coordination group to take that take that recommendation forward. And one of the things that it was given to do as its first major task was to commission some work to generate some what were termed authoritative indicators of progress in the transition to OA in the UK, with particular reference to the 4 points that I've put up there, the availability of open access options for authors in terms of publishing models, different policies relating to green OA and so on, accessibility, so how much of the content that is being published is actually available on one or other open access terms, free of charge. The question, does open access lead to more usage? And I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. Clearly, there are important issues about financial sustainability as well. One of the issues that some of us had recommended that should also be looked at was issues to do with the quality of service to both authors and to readers, because there's obviously some kind of interplay between the revenues that are accruing to publishers on the one hand and the kinds of services that they can offer on the other. In the end, that was not taken up as part of the work which we actually undertook earlier this year. So this work was commissioned by the Universities UK group. The work was led by the Research Information Network, the organisation which I lead, but it also included other members from the University of Sheffield, from Research Consulting Limited, and from Elsevier. And the research took place, as I say, in the early part of this year, and it was published by the UUK group just a little under a month ago, and I'll give you the link at the end of this talk. I'm not going to talk in this presentation at all about the methodologies that were involved in the work. You can find detail about that in the report. I'm happy to answer questions about it, but I thought in a relatively short presentation what I should do is focus on the findings themselves. So first of all, what is available in terms of open access options for authors? And first of all, within that, open access publishing models. So on the left-hand side of this slide, you can see an analysis of the over 20,000 journals that are included in Scopus, analysed by whether they are gold, charging APC, gold charging, not charging an APC, hybrid, delayed OA, which is a term I don't like because it's not really OA, but it is delayed access, those journals that provide free access to content typically after 12 or 24 months, and those that remain subscription only. And you can see comparative figures for 2012 and 2014. And on the right-hand side, you can see a similar analysis of those journals in which UK authors actually publish on the same basis. Only around 13,500 of the journals in Scopus were actually either in 2012 or 2014 actually used by UK authors. And there are some interesting differences here, as you can see. Gold journals, gold journals, find that. I'm not. Is it? No, it's not working. Gold journals now represent, in 2014, just under 17% of the total number of journals recorded in Scopus. The numbers have grown slightly over the last couple of years, although the numbers that do not charge an APC are essentially static or slightly declining. UK authors actually make use of fewer of those journals, but they make use of many more of the hybrid journals, and also significantly more of the delayed OA journals. And hybrids are growing fastest in number. They're just under just under half of the global total now, and nearly 2/3 of those in which UK authors actually publish. And subscription-only journals are falling in numbers. But I should also add, and I'm not going to present detailed information in this presentation, that there are very marked differences between particularly the larger to medium-sized publishers in their profile of journals across these different categories. There are some, obviously, that are fully gold. There are some that have much lower or much higher proportions of journals in the subscription-only or the hybrid category. But the other side of OA options is, of course, green OA, isn't it? Posting policies and embargoes. And we analysed here 3 dimensions of posting policies. Firstly, posting policies for different versions of record, author-accepted manuscripts and preprints. For the location of deposit, so personal websites, institutional repositories, subject repositories, and other places, and the embargo period. Now, this is a rather complicated bar chart here, which I'm afraid isn't showing up very well. But I think the key points that I'd want to make are, firstly, that there is a general move as you go from preprints to AAMs to versions of record, that policies become more restrictive. There's also a progression for as you move from author websites to institutional repositories to subject repositories to other kinds of sources. But a key point I'd want to make really echoes something that Fred was talking about this morning. This is an analysis of the posting policies of the most popular journals in which UK authors published in 4 different subject areas: arts and humanities, social sciences, physical sciences and engineering, and medical sciences. And for the 100 journals, I have to say there was a significant proportion where we couldn't find what the policy was on one or more of those issues. A small minority, we couldn't find what the policies were at all. And we think that we were acting as a reasonably well-informed searcher for this information. And even when we did find it, in lots of cases, we found it hellish difficult to understand. And the comparisons between different publishers were just extraordinary. As you can see, simply if you look at the sort of different colours that are showing on those bar charts, the differences between publishers are extraordinarily difficult. And that's something I do think that needs to be addressed. Let's move on to accessibility and take-up of OA publishing options. And this is, again, I'm showing on the left-hand side the global total of articles, and on the right-hand side, articles published by UK authors. And this is articles. Remember that from the earlier slide I said that a total of 17% of all journals were gold, including those that do or do not charge an APC. Now we can see that around 14%, just over 14% of articles globally were published in such journals. Actually, only about 11% in the UK, and the UK was particularly it was less than half the global average in terms of its take-up of gold without journal publishing in journals without an APC. UK authors showed a very high propensity compared with the global average for publishing in hybrid journals, and even more so for publishing in delayed OA journals. Nevertheless, 70% of UK articles remained behind a paywall in 2014. The other interesting thing to look at here is the citation impact as measured by the field-weighted citation impact. And it's very noticeable here that the highest impacts are being shown by the delayed OA journals, followed by the hybrids. And where UK authors are publishing in gold journals that charge an APC, they are going for those with higher impact levels. Let's then look at versions of articles that are actually posted and available free of charge on sites other than the publisher site. We did an automated search in March this year for versions of articles, a sample of about 9,500 articles globally. Those that have been published between 2 and 26 months earlier than March this year. And these are the results that I'm showing here. So we've got separate rows for preprints, accepted manuscripts and versions of record. And perhaps the first thing to notice is that it's versions of record that you find in much higher volumes than any other version. It's not the accepted manuscripts or the preprints that you find. Second thing to notice is the very high proportion of immediately OA articles, those that were published OA, which are also available on sites other than the publisher site. And perhaps the third thing to notice is these figures for subscription-only journals and for articles published in hybrid journals that didn't take up the OA option. 17.5% of those articles were available in some version on a site other than the publisher site. And if you take all articles together, around 24% of articles were available free of charge on sites other than the publishers. But some of those, particularly, of course, the VORs, were posted illicitly. That is, illicitly in the sense that they were not in accordance with journal policies. And if you take that into account, the total of articles legitimately posted from subscription journals was about 8%. And if you take all articles, including the gold ones, then there are around 15%. If we go to the UK, the figures are broadly similar. This is a completely parallel set of figures, except that, and this is we searched for a sample of just over 5,000 articles with UK authors. In all cases, the figures are higher than the global averages. So 30% rather than 24% for all articles, 19% for all articles excluding the illicit. If you want an analysis of where they are posted and when they are posted, I'll talk about where they're posted in a moment, but we also did an analysis of when they were posted because we broke up the two samples into time periods, and we can say exactly when they were posted within a couple of months, and you'll find that in the report. Where they are posted is interesting. The UK ones first on the left-hand side, and first of all the dark blue proportion for VORs, that's subject repositories. But look, it's the AAMs, the accepted manuscripts, and the preprints that get posted in subject repositories much more than VORs. But VORs are published on the the sharing sites, the sites that Fred was talking about this morning. And overwhelmingly, those are in ResearchGate. It is overwhelmingly the most popular place where you will find journal articles other than on the publisher's site. And say for accepted manuscripts and preprints, it's much more likely to be in subject repositories. And the interesting thing from a UK policy point of view is the red figures, which are for institutional repositories. Institutional repositories are not a major source of posted articles. Author websites are much more popular than institutional repositories. And you can see, I'm not going to go over the global comparison here. There are some interesting points to make about the difference between the UK and the rest of the world, but read the report or ask me questions about that later. So we finally did an analysis of the overall proportion of content that is available through one means or another at different points in the time scale, whether it's by delayed OA, gold journals charging an APC, hybrids, gold no APC, or postings. And you'll see here that at 0 months, in the rest of the world, globally, around 18% of articles are available immediately, and obviously that's mainly through the gold or the hybrid journals, and it's 20% for the UK. By 6 months, the figures have increased mainly because of these postings. At the bottom, it's increased to 20% globally and 24% for the UK. Significant increases, particularly in the UK, at 12 months. And this is very interesting that it's the delayed OA journals, so-called, that really have a big impact at 12 and at 24 months. Let me move on to usage. Now, there's clearly a big problem here that views, downloads of articles appear in, can take place on a huge range of sites. And gathering data from all those sites is clearly a problem. Publisher data does suggest, and this I think is fairly well known now, that there are more downloads for OA articles than for non-OA articles, but there are huge variations between journals. These are the figures from a relatively small publisher publishing 10 journals. 2 at the bottom are fully OA journals. I think what's interesting here is, yes, the ratio of downloads of OA to non-OA articles shown here shows that there are big advantages for the OA. But look at the variation. They range from 7 times to less than 2 times. And you wonder what is going on here. Why might that be? But the overall advantage for OA as against non-OA is confirmed from other sources. We looked at the journal usage statistics portal from JISC. We looked at downloads from institutional repositories in the UK, although they are highly skewed to particular journals and particular articles. Huge proportions of the downloads are in some cases for an individual article. But they're dwarfed by downloads from major subject repositories, in this case PubMed Central. PubMed Central shows that number of articles deposited is growing by nearly 400,000 a year. It's now reached over 3.5 million. And the number of downloads per article is also increasing quite fast. What we don't know is what the overall picture is, taking all the possible sites for downloads and views into account. And so we cannot answer the key question, or we can't answer with very good data the extent of the advantage of OA as distinct from non-OA articles. And that's clearly an important question from a matter of public policy. If funders and governments and individual institutions are implementing OA policies and OA mandates and so on. We simply don't know how effective it is in increasing usage. We don't know the dimensions of that. We know that there is an advantage. How big it is, we don't know. And no one has been able to present us with any data on the demographics of usage. Is all this additional usage simply taking place within the higher education and research sector, or is it taking place from the new people outside those sectors who are one of the key targets of open access policies? And we won't know the answers to any of these questions until there is better data, more available than it is at the moment, on downloads from different sites. We don't know anything at the moment about the extent of downloading, for instance, from the sharing sites. Let me move on to questions of financial sustainability. We looked at a sample of 24 universities of different sizes, different types. They weren't all the research intensives. And we found that, that expenditure on APCs had increased between 2012 and 2014 by over 6 times. And that was the result of the policies introduced by the government and research councils in the UK following the Finch report. But there are huge variations between universities. This is data from that sample of 23, 24 universities, and it's moderated by the size of the institution. So these differences, and particularly here the figures for University College London, UCL, which is a huge outlier, this is showing the expenditure on APCs per research active member of staff. So it's well over £1,000 at UCL, but for lots of other universities it's below £200 per research active member of staff. So institutions are implementing RCUK policies in very different ways. There are also huge variations in the prices paid. The individual prices paid for individual APCs as a result of discounts, special deals between individual universities and individual publishers, some offsetting arrangements that were being put in place in 2014, more of them now in place in 2015, which we couldn't show, we couldn't investigate in our data. But here we are showing the big, the rectangles are showing the figures between the two intermediate quartiles, and the bars at the top and bottom are showing the first and the fourth quartile. And then there are extreme outliers beyond those averages. So the averages, and these are shown in pounds here, which you need to multiply by around 1.5 for dollars and around 1 1/3 for euros. The overall range, it tends to be a cluster around £1,500 to £2,000, so that's around $2,300 to $3,200, around 2,000 to 2,700 euros. But the outliers are from 0 to over £4,500. So huge ranges. But there is a very close relationship between the mean APC paid and the citation impact of the journal, as measured by the field-weighted citation index. That's a very strong correlation, which is telling us something, I think. But there are also questions about the total cost for UK universities, because they're having to pay at the moment, during this transition, they're having to pay not just APCs, but also subscriptions. And APCs are now a significant part of the expenditure on the total expenditure on journals for some universities. Though again, the range is huge. From across our 24 universities, the proportion ranges from 1% to 39%, with an average of 14%. And if we exclude UCL, which is the outlier institution, which is strongest in paying APCs, it's around 12%. So, and that's what's being shown on this slide here. With the green figure, the green parts of the bar showing the subscription levels. This is data that was gathered not by us, but by some colleagues who put in freedom of information requests to universities to find the subscription expenditure they were having with 7 mixed publishers. And we've put that alongside their APC expenditure, which includes the APC expenditure for fully OA journals, fully OA publishers, sorry, the 3 biggest, PLOS, BMC, and Antin-Darwin, yeah, which was the 3rd biggest. And finally, no, sorry, I should make the point that in that context, offsetting really is an important issue that needs to be addressed. And it's going to be a continuing and I think increasingly important issue as universities in a context of financial constraint are grappling with the costs of transition. But finally, let me look at some work that my colleague Rob Johnson did on possible impacts on learned societies. All we were able to do here was essentially to establish a baseline of data. We can't really show what the impact of OA is or has been on learned societies, but we've established a baseline showing that there are around just under 300 learned societies in the UK that are publishing journals. Most of them publish only a single one. Some publish 3 or more, and some publish a lot more than 3. IOP and the Royal Society of Chemistry being particular examples of that. About a quarter of them publish on their own account, just over 3/4 use publishing partners. But the key point, I think, is this point about the dependence on publishing revenues. For some learned societies, their charitable activities depend wholly on the surpluses that they engender from their publishing activities. And this was a matter of much concern to the Finch Group, which is why it was important to do this piece of work. So there clearly are some risks to learned societies, particularly those that are publishing only 1 or 2 successful journals on which they depend to fund all the rest of their activities. We can't see much in the way of change since 2012 because we're reliant on the Society's published accounts, which in some cases only go up to 2013 at the moment. So let me bring this to a close. I think what we've done is to create a baseline picture of where we have got to with open access in the UK with some international comparators. It was, and I want to stress this, it was a collaborative exercise, and I don't think that we could have produced what we were asked to produce, which is reasonably authoritative figures, without that collaboration. We couldn't have done it all ourselves. But some important questions remain unanswered. I've mentioned the one about usage. I've mentioned the one at the beginning about quality of services to authors and readers. We didn't address that. But I think that the collaboration point is really important. But let me just finish with 4 points that I think arise from this, which perhaps go beyond the scope of what we were asked to do. Firstly, I think with regard to journals' posting policies, it is very difficult to find out in too many cases what the posting policies are in detail, what versions you can publish, where and with what kinds of embargoes, in what circumstances. So I think that the STM principles are really important and need to be taken forward. I think a second point I'd want to emphasize is what we found out about the dominance of ResearchGate when it comes to posting, to the posting of articles. That's where you can find articles much more than in many other places. I think a third point I'd want to make is that we need to look much more closely at whether at least some of the download and usage data that is collected by publishers, by repositories, by other platforms could be made more openly available so that we could begin to answer some of those usage questions. And finally, I think that, and this won't be news to you, that the whole question of the costs to funders and to universities of the transition to open access, and I want to underscore that it's a transition issue, although we don't know how long that transition is going to be. The costs to universities and funders during the transition need to be taken really seriously. So, I'd like to just end by thanking my colleagues who were involved in this work, whose names are here. This is where you can find the report, and I'll be glad to answer any questions about it. Thank you.
All right, we have a couple of microphones in the audience. Yes, Fred Dilla. And I'll get my esteemed colleague over here next.
Hi, Fred Dilla, AIP. Nice talk, Michael. Lots of data. How did your participating universities react to the figure that only a few percent of deposits were ending up in their institutional repositories? What did they think of their institutional repositories?
They have remained remarkably quiet. That's all I can say.
Thank you.
I'm going to give way because exactly the same question I was going to ask.
Other questions? And yes, the gentleman there.
John Sack, Highwire Press. Michael, one of the things that I remember from several years ago was a study done by Phil Davis about whether there was a citation advantage or a usage advantage in OA. And while there was a lot of debate at the time, what Phil found is that there was not a citation advantage and there was a usage advantage. Key to the study that he did, and I think he is talking with several Highwire publishers about repeating the study since it was done 4 or 5 years ago, was that it be blinded which articles became OA. Because a number of others had found, in fact, a citation advantage. And the theory, at least that we had at the time, was, well, authors were choosing which articles to make OA because they thought these are my best articles. Maybe they have public policy repercussions. I should make them freely available. Do you have any sense about whether that the blinding or not blinding is a critical aspect of doing a study that, like you suggest?
Yes, I think that Phil is absolutely right on the need for blinding. There is some evidence to support his thesis about which articles you choose to make open access, when you look at the citation figures that I showed for particularly the citation, the high citation rate for hybrid journals. Citation was not one of the issues that we were asked to look at in this study. It was beyond the scope of our work. As you said, there's been a huge amount of work, a huge number of studies. I think there is a site which run by, I think, Spark now, which records all such studies and whether they show a citation advantage or not. The majority of such studies do show a citation advantage, but a majority of them haven't been blinded in the way that Phil Davis has done. So I think that the jury is still out, to use the cliche, on whether the citation is a very extensive one or not, or by which I mean how big any citation advantage might be. I would like to do some further work on that, but I say it was beyond the scope of the current study.
Well, we are going to have to move along here, but let's give Mr. Michael Jubb a big round of applause.